This is going to be our most brutal episode yet. In this installment of Analyzing the Advice, I've come across probably the most egregious misunderstanding of business that I have ever seen. If I was your friend, your family member, somebody close to you, and this is your approach to entrepreneurism, then I would advise you not to do business at all, let alone try to teach it to others. What these folks have to say is not only incorrect, it is also dangerous and one of the top reasons why most businesses fail. So every now and then we get some comments that push back against my message on this channel, and I'm totally okay with that because I definitely feel as if we need to go out there and rationalize our thoughts about things. Now, my biggest criticism of the reseller model is that it is generally a very inefficient model, right? And because once you start off on it, is when it's still manageable, when it's like, 10, 20, 30 items at the beginning, right? You're not going to notice it at first, and you're going to have a lot of affirmation when you make your first sales. However, once you start getting to hundreds of listings, up to your first 1,000 listings, you'll start to notice that it's very repetitious work. And at some point, you're going to notice that this is a little bit on the inefficient side, and it's going to increase as your store size increases if you keep doing things that way. So when you really think about it, okay, I constantly compare the reselling model to a traditional business model, but here's where it gets really strange and very eye-opening. A traditional business model has been around forever. How, in comparison to, a reselling model? So how can the new reselling model be something more inefficient than a business model of your grandpappy's grandpappy? That makes no sense. So recently I got a comment that specifically says that you won't experience any burnout if you love what you do. And I feel as if that stems from the platitude of if you love what you do, you never work in a day, right? But the problem is if what you're doing is objectively inefficient, it doesn't matter how you feel about it. That doesn't change the reality of things. If anything, I would argue that this is just a way to justify being blind to a situation. Loving something really isn't an excuse to ignore reality. It's just admitting that you're okay with squandering a little bit of your resources when it comes to, time and money and energy. But what really caught my attention is that he even went as far to make comments that I believe are fallacy statements, where he says that low STR items can still be very good for a business. And that's what brings us to today's video.
I guess let's just stick with low sell-through rate is the question. So can you succeed with low sell-through rate items on this platform? That's what I want to know. Now, I know that there's been many folks that have. So the answer that I'm giving you from my experience is yes, you can. It is certainly possible.
One of the craziest things that I see eBay gurus tell people is that your items are okay because they'll eventually sell, as if the waiting game is some sort of valid strategy, okay? But the truth is, eventually doesn't cut it. Think about it. Bills have deadlines, and therefore so should your profits, because you need money to pay for those bills when the time comes. If your inventory isn't moving, you are missing out on opportunities to reinvest that cash to do more things. So if we're being real, this advice isn't just bad, it's completely reckless. They're asking you to be complacent with your time and resources. They are actively encouraging you to ignore opportunity costs, and that would be detrimental to any business. This is not only inefficient, it's also irresponsible. So let's do a little bit of math in our head here, okay? If you had an item that you purchased for $10, and then once you turn profit, you could make $5 on it, but then it sells in about 3 months, 90 days, right? Okay, so you might say to yourself, well, we'll just leave it there. It's going to sell. I'm going to get my money back on top of it, and I'm going to make money. So in that 90 days, it will eventually flip, right? And that is the idea of not worrying too much about your money. However, if you considered that that item has an STR of 90 days versus if the item that you sourced had an STR of possibly a week, right? How many times over had you already been to the next sale? Well, you might think to yourself, okay, that's really simple. How many weeks are there in 90 days? There's going to be 12 weeks in 3 months, and therefore it's going to be 12 times over. So if I have this one item and then I sell, I get $5. But then if it goes over, right, every single week, then I get to do it 12 times. So that would have been $60, right? 12 times more than the $5. Not quite. Had you been reinvesting your money and not touching the profits immediately, it would actually look something more like this. So I went ahead and ran a particular simulation, okay? Let's say you have some kind of a source, whether it's a friend or your uncle or somebody that, you know, you're able to get, let's say, a typical physical media, right? Like books or something. So if you had a source where you knew some kind of warehouse and they said to you, look, I'll let you pick up any paperback book you want for about $10. And then you knew that you could easily flip it in under a week if you set the price right. So you just said, okay, then I'm just gonna buy it for $10 and then sell it for $15, right? So we set up some parameters here on ChatGPT. Now, a real quick caveat, right? I want to point out that ChatGPT is not the end all be all of things, okay? At the end of the day, you still need to be the source material to stuff, right? Don't think that you could just plug into ChatGPT because and then just, you know, throw it out into public, because you will get some seriously embarrassing results if you're not able to proofread the math to yourself, okay? So I definitely double check the numbers on this. So let's say we have a book, right? And we bought it for $10, and $10 is our starting capital. Now, we can't buy another book if we only have half the money for it, right? So we got to keep it realistic. So in the first week, you would have a single book that you purchased for $10, and then you bought one, right? And then you sold it for $15, and then your new capital is now $15 because you got your $10 back, and then you made $5 profit on it. You would set that $5 aside, buy another single book with your starting capital because you could only purchase one book. And then the price per book never changes, right? So now you made another sale of $15 plus your original $5. Now you're at $20. That would suggest that on week 3, I could go buy 2 books. So what happens when it's rolling? Okay, it's rolling. Ultimately, what ends up is this: you have $1,055. Okay, if you were to reinvest the profit and then just go get another book that could flip in a week, go get another book that could flip in a week. By the time you're at week 6, right, you could buy 6 books. By the time you're at week 10, you could buy 31 books. By the time you're at week 12, you could have bought 70 books in order to flip. That is the power of not ignoring the opportunity cost. So I want to be very clear that it's not that you're losing $1,000, you're losing out on the opportunity of making $1,000 versus having that item just sit around and be like, okay, well, you know, 90 days later, it's eventually going to flip and then I'll get my money back and I would have made money on the product, right? And it's also a gross misunderstanding to say, all right, so what's the real difference, all right? If I flipped it a couple of times, then it's going to be like a 12x difference or whatever. Yeah, that's kind of big, but I'm not too worried about it. No, this is how big of a difference it could be. It could be an exponential difference when you just allow your money to be stagnant. That's the point. So I wanted you guys to see what happens when one of their viewers confronts them with one of the toughest questions when it comes to reselling. Now pay attention to exactly how long it takes him to answer the question.
Tommy Z says that number one challenge is, where do you consistently source these great items to sell that the person who owns it isn't already selling it online themselves? If you're hitting thrift garage sales, it's tough. So for liquidation, and you know what's cool is, I was telling Archie, I found another local source that used to be viable for me, and they just went down like the drain. Their quality was just horrible. It's like, why would I want to buy this stuff? It's now looking pretty good like it used to be. So I've added another sort of quill and another arrow in my quill that I can pull out and use if I need to. I really don't necessarily need to, but I am very intrigued, and it may be something that allows me to buy my first pallet in like 2 years instead of buying individual items. So stay tuned. I might kind of report on what I find there. But I'm always looking. I'm always checking back. I'm always, going back to this place I bought from before. How do they look right now? I'm not just focused on what I'm doing, every day. I'm doing other things as well.
But also, too, all you are doing is looking at what they are.
At best, the question says, where do you consistently source? And he just said, there's this place that I go to.
Focusing on in the one picture online. If you do what we were doing before, where we were, it looks great on the screen, but you buy it and you get it home and it's a bunch of trash. It's picked through. I mean,
what she's saying is really neither here nor there. Okay, the question is not even on the screen anymore. That's how long they've taken to basically dodge the question, right? They didn't answer it at all. So the reason why I'm so annoyed with what they're saying, okay, is that I'm annoyed for you guys. This is people positioning themselves as educators, right? And answering the questions like a politician. They never get to the core question. This is a core question when it comes to reselling. How do you consistently source good items to keep your store alive? How do you really keep doing this business? You tell people to jump in with 2 feet, commit to doing this, and then what happens when they struggle? And then you tell them, well, it's got to be good items. Okay, so where do you get the good items? This is the response that you get. Not cool. So what I really wanted to showcase in this particular example is that something so minuscule that it's only a $10 item that you'll eventually flip in 3 months versus had it been something that could consistently move at least once every single week, the difference would have been $5 to $1,055. This is huge. You see what I'm saying? So when you think of your uncle's book business that you are picking up, like all these books from his warehouse, his stuff is moving multiple quantities every single day. So it would be even more exponential compared to the $1,000 strategy. This is what we're talking about as far as opportunity costs. So anybody who is to tell you to just don't worry about it, it's going to eventually sell, we'll just leave it there, they're lying to you. This is not the way to approach business. So the original video that we're critiquing is in June of 2024. But I want you to see that he also has a video out here in January of 2023, where he specifically says to avoid slow selling items and low average selling price items, or you might end up with the same results that I did. So what I don't understand is why would you flip-flop on a piece of advice that is confirmed by a life lesson? So now what I would like to share with you is a couple of examples off the top of my head when it comes to things like opportunity costs, where there could be loss in the opportunity. So the most classic example is the one that we have now, which is your money tied up in the goods, right? But then there are also positive times where you're still experiencing opportunity costs. For example, when I first started my business and I first experienced some success, there were many times where I would sell out because I'm still new to the game and I didn't order enough quantity in order to make the gaps in between. So sometimes when people ask me, how am I doing? I'm like, well, I'm kind of sold out right now. They'll say, that's good. But to me, that's bad because my money is not being moved right now, right? So what happens is that if your money is stagnant in the bank, it's not working for you. If your money is tied up in goods that's stuck in transit, that is the same idea. It's still not moving for you. Only when your goods in a fast STR moving item is in front of you that you can pack and ship and constantly move out every single day, that's when you're not squandering your time, your energy, and your resources. So my final thoughts is that the whole series of analyzing the advice is not just about critiquing people and pointing out what's wrong with them, but rather also showcasing to people what is the proper approach to business. Anyways, guys, that is the video. Hope you learned something. If you did, please consider subscribing, and I will see you guys in the next. Take care, everyone.